Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Washington Gun Law TV. I am Washington Gun Law President William Kirk. Thanks for joining us. Hey, for those of you who've been watching the channel for a little while now, you know we recently did a video about how much force can I use to defend my catalytic converter. And that led to a lot of comments and discussions and led a few of us down a rabbit hole about a discussion of less lethal or non-lethal ammunition. Non-lethal was the terminology that many of you out there had used. And I thought this was a good segue, it's a good opportunity for us to have a candid and frank discussion about the use of less lethal ammunition in Washington State. Okay, before we get rolling, you guys know the drill. If you like this video, go ahead and click the like button down below. If you want to stay up to date on issues related to your Second Amendment right, go ahead and click the subscribe button down below. Click the little bell logo if you want to be notified when we post new videos. And most importantly, let's keep the comments and discussions coming. That's how we're going to make sure we get our videos out to more lawful and responsible gun owners like yourself. Okay, so what led us to this discussion is a previous video where we talked about the horrible rash of catalytic converter thefts that are going on around the Puget Sound region and what type of force can we use when defending our catalytic converters. Now, some of you had questions about, well, if I see somebody out there in the driveway, can I go out there guns a-blazing so long as my gun is loaded with non-lethal ammunition? And that is the terminology that some of you use, non-lethal ammunition. Okay, before we get too far down the road, though, let's define what we're talking about today. Now, we know there are non-lethal weapons. Bear, mace, pepper spray, certain tasers are considered to be non-lethal weapons. And what we're not talking about those today. What we're talking about is what some of you called non-lethal ammunition, and I'm going to call less lethal ammunition. And I think it's very important that we spend a moment talking about that definition because you're going to see how that plays into things. So I'm talking about the rubber bullets, the plastic bullets, the rubber shot shells, the bean bags, the rock salt, all of those items that are put into normal firearms and fired from regular firearms, but the round, which is going downrange, rather than being a piece of hot lead cooking at a couple thousand feet per second, we're talking about some other object which is intended to have a less lethal impact on the target downrange. Okay, so in preparation for this video, I went online, did some research, wanted to find out what this stuff is all about. Can we even find it? What's the price point and what are some of the specs on it? Now, let's take a step back for a second because some of you were calling this non-lethal ammunition. And candidly, I don't think non-lethal ammunition truly exists. The terminology here is less lethal ammunition. And when you see the use of deadly force and how this all plays out, I think that that definition becomes very important. Now, can this ammunition be found? Yes, it can. Can it be purchased? It most certainly can. But let's take a look at some of the specs. Now, I found a website called firequest.com. Really cool website. They had all sorts of very normal ammunition, regular ballistics, and they also had a huge selection of this less lethal ammunition. And just to give you a couple of examples of what we're doing, what we're dealing with here, the Iron Fist. The Iron Fist Power Punch Law Enforcement Projectile in the 5-round box. Now, according to the specs on this is coming out of the barrel, out of the muzzle, at somewhere between 200 to 250 feet per second. Now, that is at a snail's pace compared to a normal ballistic projectile. But understand that 200 to 250 feet per second equates to about 170 miles an hour. Now, if you want to get an idea of how fast that is, for those of you who are sports geeks like me, if we took a look at the highest exit velocity of major league home runs throughout the course of a season, and I'm talking about the ones that have just been absolutely crushed, okay? We're running somewhere 113, 114, 115 miles an hour on an exit velocity. These rounds are coming out of the muzzle at 170 plus miles an hour. Could that cause substantial bodily injury or serious bodily injury? You better believe it. And if striking a target, a person, in the wrong place, could it potentially cause death? It most certainly could. Now, compare that with this 410 gauge rubber buckshot, also found on the same website. They are advertising that this comes out of the barrel on an 18-inch normal shotgun barrel at approximately 1,400 feet per second. Now, your average 12-gauge target load is doing around 1,200 feet per second. Your average 9mm and 115 grain is doing about 1,150 feet a second. Your average 147 grain 9mm subsonic round is doing somewhere a little less than 950 feet per second. So this gives you an idea of the sheer velocity in which these things are coming out. And could they cause serious bodily injury? Yes, they could. In fact, many of them are intended to do exactly that. And could they cause death? Yes, they could. So the hypothetical that we've been talking about is you wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, you hear some rummaging around in your driveway, you look outside, you see a pair of legs sticking out from under your car, you hear the sawzall going, you kind of know what's going on. Your catalytic converter's being stolen. And so what we do then is we run outside, guns a-blazing, and we just absolutely open fire on the would-be thief, but we're using less lethal ammunition. Well, here's the problem, and here's why I highly recommend that we don't do this. When we take a look at the definition of deadly force found in RCW 9A.16.010, we learn that deadly force is defined as deadly force means the intentional application of force through the use of firearms or any other means reasonably likely to cause death or serious physical injury. Deadly force is the use of any firearm that could likely cause death or serious physical injury. Now, let's back up for a second, get a little historical perspective here for those of us who've been watching the channel about what is the level of force we can use. Now, we know under RCW 9A.16.020, subsection 3, that we get to use all reasonable, necessary, and proportional force to defend ourselves, other people in our presence, or our property. But we also know under RCW 9A.16.050 that we cannot use lethal force unless we ourselves are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, somebody else in our presence is in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury, or a felony is being committed upon our person or inside our home. Absent those limited circumstances, lethal or deadly force is not legally authorized. Now, when we take a look at the hypothetical of someone who's cutting the catalytic converter out of the car, when we come out of the house, all guns a-blazing, what we are essentially doing is that at that very moment, we are using deadly force. But we also know under Washington law, and we'll post the link for the video down below, that we don't ever get to use deadly force to defend only property. The reason, of course, being that we ourselves or some other person in our presence is not in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Our property is being destroyed. Our property is being stolen. Do we have the right to use force to defend it? Yes, we do, so long as it is reasonable and proportional. But what many of you believe is that if somehow or another I load my firearm with less lethal ammunition, then the use of that firearm will not constitute deadly force under the law. Well, that's wrong. That's not how it works. And so I can assure you, in this scenario, when we come out of our house, guns a-blazing, but we're using less lethal ammunition, is law enforcement going to determine that as some use of force less than deadly force? No, they're not. Now, in addition to the legal conundrum that your poor judgment would have created in this situation, let's take a look at another obvious and very realistic possibility of where this could lead. We come out of the home, we open fire using less lethal ammunition. The assailant, the person, the thief, is also armed. But now they are armed with real ammunition. So one, you have placed yourself in a significant intellectual disadvantage through your poor choices. But in addition to that, we have now placed ourselves in both a tactical and ballistic disadvantage because we are engaged in a gunfight where both sides are using lethal force, yet only one side is packing what we would determine as full lethal ammunition. Listen, the bottom line is this, and I have said this before, in the state of Washington, a good rule of law is that we will never point or aim a firearm at another person unless we are in imminent threat of death or serious bodily injury. Another way of saying that is we will never point or aim a firearm at another person unless we have legal justification to point and pull the trigger. If we find ourselves in an actual situation where we believe that we have to use deadly force to protect ourselves or somebody else in our presence, why would we use anything which is deemed as less lethal? Listen, you may have more questions about the use of less lethal ammunition or anything related to your Second Amendment rights, and if you do, don't ever hesitate to contact us at WashingtonGunLaw.com, or of course you can call us directly at 425-765-0487. Now remember, part of being a lawful and responsible gun owner, like we talk about all the time here at Washington Gun Law, is to know what the law is in every situation and how it applies to you in any instance that you may find yourself. Until next time, thanks for watching. Stay safe.